Chapter 14, Rizal in London, year 1888 to 1889. After visiting United States, Rizal lived in London from May 1888 to March 1889. He chose the English city to be his new home for three reasons. First, to improve my knowledge in English language. Second, to study and annotate Morga, Sucesos de las Islas, Filipinas. Third, London was a safe place for me to carry on my fight against Spanish tyranny. In London, he also engaged in Filipino studies, completed annotating Morga's book, wrote many articles for La Solidaridad in defense of his people against Spanish critics, penned a famous letter to the young woman of Maloles, carried on his voluminous correspondence with Blumentritt and relatives, and had a romance with Gertrude Beckett. To trip across the Atlantic. The transatlantic voyage of Rizal from New York to Liverpool was a pleasant one. He won many friends of different nationalities on board the palatial city of Rome because of his friendly nature and his ability as a linguist. While on the board, Rizal entertained American and European passengers with his marvelous skill with the yo-yo as an offensive weapon. Yo-yo is a small wooden disc attached to a string from the finger. It is used by Filipino children as a toy, but Rizal manipulates it as a weapon of offense, to the great amazement of the foreigners. Rizal arrived at Liverpool, England on May 24, 1888. He stayed one day in this port city, spending the night at the Adelphi Hotel. Rizal wrote to his family. He said that Liverpool is a big and beautiful city and its celebrated port is worthy of its great fame. The entrance is magnificent and the custom house is quite good. So trip in London, or the life of Rizal in London. On May 25, 1888, a day after docking at Liverpool, Rizal went to London. For a short time, he stayed as guest at the home of Dr. Antonio Maria Regidor, an exile of 1872 and a practicing lawyer in London. By the end of May, he found a modest boarding place at number 37 Chalcot Crescent, Primrose Hill. He was a boarder of the Beckett family. The Becketts were Mr. Beckett is an organist of St. Paul's Church, Mrs. Beckett is his wife, and he has two sons and four daughters. The eldest of Beckett's sisters was Gertrude, called Jetite or Jetith or Tottie. Rizal came to know Dr. Reinhold Rose, the librarian of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and an authority on Malayan languages and customs. He was impressed by Rizal's learning and character, and he gladly recommended him to the authorities of the British Museum. He also called a pearl of a man, or una perla de hombre. News from home, good and bad. So, sa kabila, no, nakatanggap naman si Dr. Rizal ng good and bad news. The bad news were the injustices committed by the Spanish authorities on the Filipino people and Rizal family. So, meron dito mga nakalagay na sumusunod, magbabanggit lang ako dito ng ilan. So, naging bad news dito ang Rizal's brother-in-law, Manuel P. Hidalgo, husband of Saturnina, was exiled by Governor General Wheeler to Bohol without the due process of law. And his friend, Laureniano Viado, a medical student at the University of Santo Tomas, was arrested and jailed in the Libid prison because copies of the Noli were found in his house. While one good news was Rev. Vicente Garcia's defense on the Noli against the attackers of friars. He heard it from Mariano Ponce. And because of that, he was deeply gratified by the courageous actions of Father Garcia, a venerable Filipino canon of the Manila Cathedral. Later, on January 7, 1891, he wrote to Father Garcia and he expressed his personal thanks. So, the Morga's book. The greatest achievement of Rizal in London was the annotating of Morga's book, Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, or the historical events of the Philippine Islands. So, it was published in Mexico, year 1609, sa British Museum. So, he spent many days in the reading room of the British Museum, poring over the pages of this book and laboriously reading the old histories of the Philippines, such as those written by Father Chirino, Father Colin, Father Agensola, Father Plasencia, and etc. So, for about 10 months, Rizal was deeply immersed in his historical studies in London, during which time his compatriots in Spain were waging the crusade for Philippine reforms. At one time, Mariano Ponce, whom he had never yet met and who was then living in Barcelona, urged him to edit a newspaper which would defend the Filipino interest from the scurrilous attacks of their Spanish detractors. So, a short visit to Paris and Spain. So, early in September 1888, visits Paris. So, he visited Paris for a week in order to search for more historical materials in the Bibliothèque Nationale. So, he was entertained in this gay French metropolis by Juan Luna and his wife, which is Paz Pardo de Tavera, and their sons, Andres, which is also called Luling. After poring over the old books and manuscripts in the Bibliothèque Nationale, he returned to London. On December 11, 1888, he went to Spain, visiting Madrid and Barcelona. He contacted his compatriots and surveyed the political situation with regards to the agitation for Philippine reforms. For the first time, he met Marcelo H. del Pilar and Mariano Ponce, which is the two titans of the propaganda movement. So, sila yung two titans ng propaganda. He exchanged ideas with these new friends and promised to cooperate in the fight for reforms. So, December 24, which is Christmas, Rizal returned to London and spent Christmas and New Year's Day with Beckett. He experienced a delightful Christmas Eve, his first on English soil. That night, he wrote to Blumentritt, which is Rizal's friend. So, Rizal sent as Christmas gift a bust of Emperor Augustus, which he had made. This emperor was the ruler of the Roman Empire when Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem. To another friend, Dr. Carlos Zepelak, which is a Polish scholar, he gave as Christmas gift a bust of Julius Caesar. So Rizal's landlady, Mrs. Beckett, knowing of his interest in magic, she gave him as Christmas gift a book entitled The Life and Adventures of Valentine Vox, the Ventriloquist. Rizal was delighted to receive this book, for he had great admiration for this British magician, who was famous for his ventriloquism. So while busy in his historical studies in London, Rizal learned that the Filipinos in Barcelona were planning to establish a patriotic society which would cooperate in the crusade for reforms. This society, called Asociación La Solidaridad or Solidaridad Association, was inaugurated on December 31, 1888. So with the following officers: Galicano Apisable, which is the president; Graciano Lopez Haina, the vice president; Manuel Santamaria, secretary; Mariano Ponce, treasurer; Jose Maria Panganiban is an accountant. So by an unanimous vote of all the members, Rizal was chosen honorary president. So, a recognition of his leadership among all Filipino patriots in Europe. So, naging leader si Dr. Jose Rizal ng mga Pilipino sa Europa. February 15, 1889, Graciano Lopez Haina founded the patriotic newspaper called La Solidaridad in Barcelona, where he was residing. This was a fortnightly periodical which served as the organ of the propaganda movement. Its aims were as follows: to work peacefully for political and social reforms, to portray the deplorable condition of the Philippines so that Spain may remedy them, to oppose the evil forces of reaction and medivalism, to advocate liberal ideas and progress, to champion the legitimate aspirations of the Filipino people to life, democracy, and happiness. So 2 days after the birth of La Solidaridad, Marcelo H. del Pilar wrote to Rizal in London. He said that, "At last our little newspaper was born. It is democratic in its opinion, but very much more so in the organization of its staff. One should see how Editor Graciano writes, correct proofs, directs the printing, distributes the copies, and even takes them to the mail. So the manager gathers the data, edits, corrects the proofs, writes the leads, prepares the correspondence, and also distributes the copies. I am the only idler through the newspaper had me preoccupied during the period of its conception and birth, for which reasons I am behind in my correspondence with you." So, yun yung sinulat ni Rizal kay Marcelo. And he also congratulated Lopez Haina and his associates in founding La Solidaridad. So the first article in La Solidaridad. So Rizal's first article, which appeared in La Solidaridad, was entitled Los Agricultores Filipinos, or the Filipino Farmers. It was published on March 25, 1889, 6 days after he left London for Paris. While busy in research studies at the British Museum, Rizal received news on Fray Rodriguez's unabated attack on his Noli. In defense, he wrote a pamphlet entitled La Vision del Fray Rodriguez, or The Vision of Fray Rodriguez, which was published in Barcelona under his nom de plume Dimas Alang. In order to defend his novel. In La Vision del Fray Rodriguez, Rizal demonstrated two things. So, number one, his profound knowledge of religion, and number two, his biting satire, or satire. In London, Rizal wrote the famous letter to the young women of Malolos on February 22, 1889 in Tagalog. So, yung title nun is Letter to the Young Women of Malolos. At sinulat ito sa wikang Tagalog. This letter is to praise the young ladies of Malolos for their courage to establish a school where they could learn Spanish despite the opposition of Father Felipe Garcia, a Spanish parish priest of Malolos. So we have the main points of this letter. So, where a Filipino mother should teach her children love of God, fatherland, and mankind. So, yung second, the Filipino mother should be glad, like the Spartan mother, to offer her sons in the defense of the fatherland. And third, a Filipino woman should know how to preserve her dignity and honor. A Filipino woman should educate herself aside from retaining her good racial virtues. Faith is not merely reciting long prayers and wearing religious pictures, but rather it is living the real Christian way, with good morals and good manners. So Dr. Reinhold Rose is an editor of Traveler's Record, a journal devoted to Asian studies, requests Rizal to contribute some articles. In response to his request, the latter prepared two articles: The Specimens of Tagal Folklore, published in the journal in May 1889, and The Two Eastern Fables, published in June 1889. Rizal with Gertrude Beckett. So, Rizal had a romantic interlude with the oldest of the three Beckett sisters, which is Gertrude, or Getty, as she was affectionately called, was a buxom English girl with brown hair, blue eyes, and rosy cheeks. She fell in love with Rizal. On cold winter mornings, she had a sunny smile for him, chattering gaily like a hummingbird. During the family picnics, she was particularly very happy because Rizal was with them and she gave him all her attention. And in rainy days, when Rizal stayed at home, she helped him by mixing his colors for painting or assist in preparing the clay for sculpturing. So, Rizal being a man of normal emotions, he found exhilarating joy in Gertrude's company, and their friendship drifted towards romance. So in reciprocation, she fondly called him Petty. As their flirtation was fast approaching the point of no return, Rizal suddenly realized that he could not marry Getty for he had a mission to fulfill in life. So with iron will, he suppressed the passionate yearning of his heart and decided to go away so that Getty may forget him. And before living in London, he finished the four sculptural works. And ito yung apat na sculptural works. Prometheus Bond, The Triumph of Death Over Life, The Triumph of Science Over Death, a composite carving of the heads of the Beckett sisters, which is yung last nang ginawa na head ng Beckett sisters ay iniregalo niya ito bilang farewell sa magkakapatid na Beckett. And then, yung Triumph of Death Over Life at saka Triumph of Science Over Death na ginawa niya, ay ibinigay naman niya ito sa kanyang kaibigan na si Professor Blumentritt. Yan, siya si Professor Blumentritt. And then, ayun na nga, nagtuluyan na siya magpaalam sa London noong March 19, 1889. At dito na nagtatapos yung report ko na chapter 14. At maraming salamat.